Yo, welcome back to Son of a Preacher Man. As always, I am your host, the Soapman. Now, I have a very special episode for you this evening, and I'm really excited about it. It's my introduction into a multi-part series on the book of Exodus. Now, like the book of Genesis, the book of Exodus is one of the most complex and controversial books in the Bible. The reason for this is because it's so hotly debated among both scholars and common folk alike. The Bible tells us exactly what happened in the Exodus, but the problem is that it happened over 3,500 years ago. Everyone has a different opinion on exactly what happened, exactly where it happened, and exactly how it happened. Fortunately for you, there's a soapman to clean it all up. So, due to the complexity of this subject, I've decided to break this lesson up into several parts in order to maximize accuracy and minimize confusion. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I present to you the Exodus, Part 1. Now, there are 3 topics that I want to cover in this episode. The first is Moses, or as I like to call him, Apepi, leaves Egypt. The second topic I want to cover is how many Hebrews left with him, or approximately, roughly, how many Hebrews left Egypt with Moses. And the third thing I want to cover is how many Egyptians followed after the Hebrews when they left. Now, in my last 2 episodes, I claimed that the Hyksos pharaoh named Apepi was indeed the biblical Moses. And in order for that to be true, the life of Apepi must follow the biblical narrative. And up until this point, I believe I've proven that it has. But if Apepi is in fact the biblical Moses, then he must leave Egypt. And he must take the Hebrew slaves with him when he does. Moses freeing the Hebrew slaves is the crux of the book of Exodus. Exodus literally means to leave or to exit. So in order for my claim that Apepi is Moses to be true, Apepi must leave Egypt. Now let me talk to you for a minute. Y'all like that beat? I like that beat. Now, so-called experts will tell you that Apepi died in Egypt. And they make this claim despite not having a scintilla of proof. They have no evidence whatsoever to show that Apepi died in Egypt. They assume he died. And we all know what happens when you assume, right? You make an ass out of you and umption. They assume he died because a Hyksos ruler named Kamudi reigned after him. Now, Egyptologist Dr. David Rohl feels that I'm distorting the biblical narrative. And I understand how Dr. Rohl feels. I understand why he says that. He's thinking to himself, who is this Negro? Where does he come from? Who does he think he is? But I'm not distorting the biblical record. In fact, I'm keeping to it. Remember this, folks. It's not about what the Bible says. It's more about what the Bible means. I'm saying Apepi is the biblical Moses, and like the biblical narrative states, Apepi left Egypt. and was very much alive when he did so. Because if Apepi did not leave Egypt, and if he did not leave Egypt with Hebrew slaves, then he ain't Moses. You see, the problem that people like Dr. David Rowe have with me is that I'm telling them what the Bible didn't tell them. I'm filling in all the holes and gaps, and they don't understand how. They're like, who is this Negro? Where does he come from? Who does he think he is? Well, I'm the Soapman, and I'm from Gary, Indiana, baby. They cannot wrap their minds around the fact that I know something that they don't. And this is because they don't understand God. If you do not make time for the Lord, he will not make time for you. Look, I know it's confusing. The Bible states that Moses freed all the Hebrew slaves and left Egypt. So in your mind, you would assume that's it, right? No more Hebrews in Egypt. But the fact is that Moses left Egypt with mostly slaves, and many of the Hebrews stayed behind. You see, not all of the Hebrews / Hyksos were slaves in Egypt. A portion of the Hyksos were in power, dominating and ruling Egypt, and they had no intentions of giving up their seats of power. Kamudi began to reign after Apepi, and he was eventually defeated, and the remaining Hyksos were expelled from Egypt. They were defeated and expelled by Egyptian Pharaoh Ahmose, who was the younger brother of Pharaoh Kamose. But by then, Apepi was long gone. I know, confusing, right? You may have to rewind. You see, the biblical records state that Moses left with Hebrew slaves. And the historical record states that Ahmose defeated and expelled the Hyksos. So the stories don't seem to match. But both narratives are in fact true. Apepi left with Hebrews, mostly slaves, and then Ahmose came behind him and defeated and expelled the remaining people who stayed behind. To the experts who say that Apepi died, I say, where's the proof? There's no tomb. Who told you that? Where did you get this information? Was he defeated in battle? Why didn't anybody write about it? Apepi was a great and successful ruler. Who wouldn't want the rights to brag about defeating and killing him? Is that not the Egyptian custom? To defeat your enemies and make a stela bragging about how you defeated this great and ferocious foe that no one else could defeat? Maybe exaggerate and embellish the facts a little in the process? If Apepi was killed, it would have been like Game of Thrones. They would have placed his head on a spike and paraded it all throughout Egypt, all up and down the River Nile. The Egyptians would have celebrated it and made it a national holiday. It would have been like Easter. It would have been like Christmas in America. Nobody would have had to go to work that day. Where is the evidence that Apepi died? There is none. Kamose wrote in his stela that he defeated Apepi, but it was a lie. Ladies and gentlemen, we know it was a lie because we can prove it. Please, always follow the evidence. Even in your personal lives, always follow the evidence. We know Kamose lied about defeating Apepi because Kamose died abruptly. He reigned for 5 or 6 years before his mama took over the throne. His mama took the throne because at the time his younger brother, Ahmose, was too young to rule. Furthermore, Kamose also lied and said that he destroyed the Hyksos capital city of Avaris. We know this was a lie. We know this was a lie because evidence shows us that Avaris was destroyed later by his younger brother Akmose. Also, how could Kamose have destroyed Avaris when Kamudi, who ruled after Apepi, ruled for at least 11 years? He ruled at Avaris for at least 11 years. And Kamose only ruled for about 5 or 6 years at the most. Did Kamose's ghost come back and destroy Avaris? Or maybe Kamudi ruled from a destroyed city? Nonsense. Kamose lied. He made that stela prior to pursuing Apepi into the desert, confident that he would return victorious. But he was wrong. So why do experts claim that Apepi died when they have no evidence? They are assuming. And we all know what happens when you assume. You make a coon out of yourself and end up on Soapman's rant. There is not one iota of evidence that Apepi died. There is not one shred of evidence that Apepi died. And if so, where is it? Produce it. Provide it. Now, experts can flip this right back on me. They can use my words against me. They could say, well, prove that he didn't die. Soapman, where is your evidence? Where is your evidence, Soapman, that Apepi left Egypt alive? And to that I say, I'm so glad you asked. Because I believe that there is in fact proof that suggests Apepi left Egypt. And all it requires is a little common sense. But before I go to that, I'd like to know what Gollum has to say about experts claiming that Apepi died, seeing that Gollum is our authority on Cap. Gollum?
They stole it from us. Sneaky little hobbitses. Wicked, tricksy, fierce.
And Gollum, what do you have to say about Kamose's claim that he defeated Apepi and destroyed the capital city of the Hyksos, Avaris?
They stole it from us. Sneaky little hobbitses. Wicked, tricksy, fierce.
Well said, Gollum. Well said. In ancient Egypt, it was customary and even expected that the pharaoh would build structures, monuments, statues, pyramids, but most importantly, tombs. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife, and the building of their burial site would have been of the utmost importance to them. Well, as I have previously stated, there is no tomb for Apepi, not even the remains of one. He constructed temples for the dedication of worship to Sotik, which was the only god he would worship. You see, Apepi was the first Egyptian to practice monotheism, which is the worship of only one god. By the way, was not Moses the first person in Egypt to also adopt the practice of only worshiping one god? Apepi worshipped Sotik exclusively. We recognize Sotik as the Egyptian god Seth. This would have been a cardinal sin and of great offense to the Egyptians, as the god Seth was considered one of the lesser gods and not fit to be worshipped exclusively. All real Egyptians know that Only the chief god Amun-Ra was fit to be worshipped in this fashion. But Apepi commanded that the worship of Amun-Ra was to cease, and that Seth and only Seth was to be worshipped, and he erected temples for the exclusive worship of Seth only. Now you may be wondering, how could Apepi be Moses if he's worshiping Seth and not Jehovah? Well, when Moses initially fled Egypt as a fugitive for killing an Egyptian soldier that he saw abusing a Hebrew slave, the only gods he knew were the Egyptian gods that he had learned of. We know this is true because when God spoke to Moses through the burning bush, Moses asked, "Who are you?" And where was Moses when he spoke to God through the burning bush? The desert. And who is Seth? The god of the desert. And how did Moses perform his miracles in Egypt? By way of storms. And who is the Egyptian god Seth? The god of storms. So you see, when Moses met God in the desert, he thought it was the only God he had ever learned about. The Egyptian god Seth, the god of deserts and storms. Apepi also built monuments in dedication to his sister. By the way, didn't Moses also have a sister that he was rather fond of? Miriam, I believe her name was. By the way, Apepi had multiple brothers and sisters. Now, in the biblical narrative, they only speak of one of Moses' brothers, Aaron, and they only speak of one of Moses' sisters, Miriam. But does that mean Moses didn't have multiple brothers and sisters? I believe he did. And I believe Apepi is the proof that he had multiple brothers and sisters. Just because the Bible didn't tell you he had other brothers and sisters doesn't mean he didn't have other brothers and sisters. So there you have it, folks. Soapman just told you something that the Bible didn't tell you. Once again. Apepi built temples for the worship of Seth, and he built monuments dedicated to his favorite sister. But he didn't build any tombs or pyramids. No, he had a different approach. You see, monuments and temples can be erected fairly quickly, a few years at most. But pyramids and tombs take a lifetime. He didn't have time to waste on lifetime projects because he planned to leave Egypt. So instead, he just chiseled or scratched off the name of some prior pharaoh and forged his own. This man had no respect for the Egyptians. Yeah, he said, look here, someone before me spent their entire life building this Sphinx. I don't have time to build one of my own, so I'll just make a few minor cosmetic adjustments, scratch their name off, and replace it with my own. This is a statue of Joseph. I believe it dates back to the 17th century BCE, so between 1800 and 1700 BCE. This statue is referred to as the Asiatic because it is not the statue of an Egyptian. It's 2 meters high and 1.5 meters in depth. So according to Egyptian customs, whoever he was a man of high rank and great authority. Experts believe, and I agree, that this is a statue of the Hebrew Joseph. Notice his multicolored coat. But this statue wasn't found all nice and neatly preserved as this picture depicts. This is merely a recreation of what it is believed to have looked like based on the scant paint residue that survived, along with other surviving evidence. No, when it was found, it looked more like this: defaced, vandalized, and broken into pieces. Notice how the eyes have been gouged out with a pickaxe or chisel. This damage was not caused by weathering in time. This damage was caused by man. This statue was destroyed. Though the paint may have been removed through weathering in time, you can clearly see that the chips and damage left by tools were left by tools rather than by natural causes. By the way, the capital of the Hyksos people was called Avaris. In the Bible, Joseph is consistently referred to as Ivri, which in English means Hebrew. The Hebrew word Ivri, the Hebrew word Ivri means Hebrew in English. Ivri means Hebrew. The Hebrew word ha-ish means man in English. Let me say that again. The Hebrew word Ivri in English means Hebrew. Ivri means Hebrew. That's what Joseph was consistently called in the Bible. He was called or referred to as Ivri, which means in English a Hebrew. The Hebrew word ha-ish in English means man. Now let's put the two together. Ivri ha-ish. Ivri ha-ish. Ivri ha-ish. Ivri ha-ish. Avaris. Sounds and pronunciations change over time, but it is highly possible that Avaris, the Hyksos capital, literally means land of the Hebrew or land of the Hebrew man. By the time of Apepi's rule over 200 years after the destruction of this statue, Apepi would have been aware of the Egyptian hatred of his people. And he would have known or even seen the destruction of his forefathers, Joseph's statue. Don't you think a man of his brilliance would say, if they destroy Joseph's statue, they'll probably do the same to anything I build also. But if I forge my name on someone else's property, someone popular, someone that they like, then they'll be less inclined to destroy it. Because if they do, they'll be destroying the monuments of their heroes just to get rid of my name. But if that's not enough to convince you, then consider this. Apepi wrote a letter to the king of Nubia in the south, and it reads, "Why did you not tell me you had become or made yourself king? Come north. There is no need to worry. Kamosa is busy with me here. We will divide the towns of Egypt between us, and Nubia will rejoice." In his letter, he tells the king of Nubia to come north and invade Egypt. Now, why would the sovereign of Egypt, who has a firm grip on power, who is firmly in control of the country, tell the Nubians to invade? He even goes so far as to tell them, we will divide or split the land between us. He says, we will divide the towns of Egypt like they're pieces of candy. Who tells someone to invade their own country? Who tells someone to invade the country that they're ruling? He obviously doesn't care. And why does a Pepe not care, you ask? Because he's leaving. And he knows he's leaving. He's telling the Nubian king to come take possession of Egypt, because I'm not going to be here anyway. Matter of fact, you better hurry up and get here while I'm still here to help you. Remember, the Hyksos were ruling from the north. Let me get my little pointer here. Can you see my pointer? The Hyksos were ruling from the north. Kamose had his hands full with Apepi. Apepi even says so. And Apepi is telling the hesitant Nubians down here, down south, come on, come north. Kamose ain't gonna do jack squat. I got him up here in a headlock, about to break his back. I'm doing all my WWE wrestling moves on him up here. The people's elbow, the walls of Jericho, all that shit. I'm holding him back by his forehead while he's taking swings at me, hitting nothing but air. You know, like how you would do a child. My older brother used to do me like that when we was kids. Now, let me get back, because the second point that I want to deal with this episode has to do with how many Hebrews left with Moses, because for reasons I don't understand, this seems to be an issue of contentious debate. The Bible specifically says how many people left with him, so I really don't understand what the argument is. The Bible clearly states in Numbers chapter 1, verses 45 through 46. And it says, so were all those that were numbered of the children of Israel by the house of their fathers, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war in Israel. Even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. So 603,550. It says basically a little over 500,000 men left with Moses. 20 years and up left. 20 years and up. Now, that's a pretty big number. But that's not all it says. In Exodus, in the book of Exodus, the Bible goes even further. And this is what it says. Exodus chapter 12, verses 37 through 38 say, and the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men, beside children. I have in red print. So about 600,000 on foot that were men, beside children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, and very much cattle. Now you know that the children were not part of the 600,000. And here's how you know that. Let's go back. What does the Bible say? It says, so were all those that were numbered of the children of Israel by the house of their fathers, from 20 years old and upward. That is the key. That's the key passage to let you know this does not include the children that were beside them. From 20 years old and upward. All, and then it goes even further on to say, all that were able to go forth to war in Israel. Even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. So when it says later in Exodus that these 600,000 or 603,550 to be exact, were beside children, that does not include the children. The children are not included in that 603,550. In addition to the children, it says, and a mixed multitude went up also with them. Now, there's something you need to keep in mind, and that is that many of these individuals were related. The Bible states that they were beside children. Biology should let you know that these men didn't birth these kids. And common sense should tell you that all these men were not caring for all these children on their own, which means there were women. Now, I'm not saying there was a woman for every single man, but I think it's safe to say that the majority of these men had wives, girlfriends, or mistresses. There were probably also widows and so on and so forth. With the inclusion of women, we have to at least double the original number of 600,000. That puts us at roughly 1.2 million. But then there were kids. And though I'm not saying every single person had kids, it must also be considered that some people had multiple children. The Bible states that the Hebrew people were greatly multiplied despite the afflictions imposed by the hands of the Egyptians. So we know there were a lot of children. Let's add another 500,000, and I feel that's being lenient. That puts us at about 1.7 million. Let's adjust for errors and just say 1.5 million so far. But then the Bible says that a mixed multitude went also. Now, this may mean women, since the Bible specifies only men besides children with a specific number, but it's easy to see that somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million Hebrews left with Moses. At the least, 1.5 million. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about an absolute horde of men, women, children, cattle, sheep, donkeys, dogs, cats, wagons, you name it. Now let's deal with the number of Egyptians that pursued after them. The Egyptians learned chariot warfare from their battles with the Hyksos, with the majority of the time the Egyptians being on the losing side. But the Egyptians eventually learned from their defeats at the hands of the Hyksos. They picked up the trade of chariot warfare and would later become experts in their own right. Take it from me. Nothing can teach you and learn you faster than a good old-fashioned ass whooping. The Bible says in Exodus chapter 14, verses 6 through 9, and he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. He took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them. All the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen, and his army, and overtook them encamping by the sea, beside Pi-Hahiroth, before Baal-Zephon. Now, let me reread a part of this to you because this is what I want you to understand. It says that Pharaoh, king of Egypt, took 600 chosen chariots. So he handpicked 600 chosen chariots and put a captain over each one. Now let's go back. Usually in chariot warfare, you have one man driving the chariot and you have another warrior who's either going to be shooting arrows or jumping off that thing with swords and spears. So Pharaoh Kamose chose hand-picked 600 chariots and hand-picked a captain over each one. In addition to this, look what I have in bold red print. It says, but the Egyptians pursued after them all the horses and all the chariots of Pharaoh. And then it says, and his horsemen. And then it says, and his army. So that lets you know it wasn't just 600 hand-picked chariots that were going with him. He had horsemen, which in military terms would be called a cavalry. And he also had an army, which in military terms means foot soldiers. So exactly how many Egyptians pursued the Hebrews? Well, Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, in his Chronicles, The Antiquities of the Jews, says that Pharaoh pursued the Hebrews with an army of 50,000 men. Now, I don't know if that included the chariots and horsemen, but even if all 50,000 men were foot soldiers, there were still no more than a few thousand horsemen and even less chariots. A 2,000 man cavalry, or 2,000 men on horses, meaning on horseback, is a pretty solid number. With all that being said, whether it was 50,000 in total or 55,000, we know it was roughly around 50,000, and that is a pretty sizable number. In 300 BC, Alexander the Great took over all of the known world with a similar sized army. In fact, I think he had a few less. I think he had 45,000 man army. Now, Pharaoh Kamose is no fool. He knows that Apepi is no one to trifle with. He says himself, or at least suggests, that Apepi is divine. In the stela he creates, he uses symbolism to suggest that Apepi is divine. In addition, he has learned from his father's mistakes, meaning Kamose. Kamose has learned from his father's mistakes. He watched as his father, Sekenra Tau, rushed into battle with Apepi, only to be defeated and then executed. And Kamose is not about to make the same mistakes as his father made. He's not going to risk meeting the same fate. He knows all too well what Apepi is capable of. Apepi has the advantage as far as sheer numbers, but his ranks are littered with women, children, the elderly, and livestock. Plus, Apepi and his horde are on foot. Apepi cannot possibly organize his troops mingled with women and children. He has no chariots, and his troops cannot possibly fight effectively while trying to defend women and children. Not to mention with livestock and cattle stampeding all throughout their ranks. All these facts significantly swing the odds in Kamose's favor, giving him a huge advantage. And he knows it. So he gathers his troops, and before leaving Egypt, he creates a stela upon which he tells of what he believes will be an inevitable victory for himself. Kamose hates Apepi. Kamose hates Apepi. He always has. And there will never be another opportunity like the one he now has before him. A chance to finally avenge his father and defeat his sworn enemy, which he has desired to beat for so long. Kamose amasses every able-bodied man, horse, and chariot that he can muster, and he comes out of Egypt like a bat out of hell, all guns blazing. Ladies and gentlemen, as much as I would like to continue, I've went over my time too many times and lied saying that I wouldn't do it. But I'm not a preacher. I'm a teacher. So I lie sometimes. But now when it comes to the good book, look, man, I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of Son of a Preacher Man. As always, if you're new to this channel, hit that like and subscribe button. If you got any comments, congratulations, or insults, please leave them in the comment section. I would absolutely love to hear from you. I hope you learned something this episode, and I'll see you next time. Same soap time, same soap channel. Deuces.